The millionaire widower just wanted company at the gala, but the nanny became the center of attention. Hey there, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from before we start. And once the story ends, make sure to give it a score from 0 to 10. Enjoy the ride. Claire Bennett knew she was crossing a line the moment she lingered too long watching him read bedtime stories to his daughter. The grandfather clock in the marble hallway chimed 8:30, its deep resonance echoing through the Sinclair mansion like a gentle warning. Claire stood just outside little Isla's bedroom door, her hand frozen on the brass handle, listening to Graham's warm voice bring life to characters in a fairy tale she'd heard him read dozens of times before. And the princess realized, his voice carried that familiar tender quality reserved only for his 7-year-old daughter, that sometimes the most precious treasures are the ones we almost overlook. Claire's heart did that dangerous flutter again, the same one that had been happening more frequently over the past 11 months of working in this house. She pressed her lips together, reminding herself of the invisible boundary that existed between employer and employee, between the grieving widower architect and the professional nanny who had somehow become essential to his carefully ordered world. Graham Sinclair wasn't supposed to notice her the way she caught him doing lately, those fleeting glances across the breakfast table when he thought she was focused on cutting Isla's pancakes, the way his voice softened when he said, "Good morning, Claire," before heading to his downtown architecture firm, the almost smile that touched his lips when she helped Isla with homework at the kitchen island while he reviewed blueprints nearby. She was just the help, reliable, competent, invisible, except lately, she felt anything but invisible. "Miss Claire?" Isla's sweet voice called from inside the bedroom. "Are you still there?" Claire quickly pushed open the door, stepping into the soft glow of the princess-themed room that Graham had designed himself after his wife's death 3 years ago. Isla sat propped against her mountain of stuffed animals, her dark hair, so much like her father's, spilling over her pink pajamas. Graham stood beside the bed, still holding the storybook, his tall frame somehow both commanding and gentle in the dim lighting. When his eyes met Claire's, something flickered there, a recognition maybe, or a question he wasn't ready to ask. "Daddy finished the story," Isla announced, patting the comforter beside her. "But I wanted to tell you about what happened at school today." Claire moved to sit on the edge of the bed, hyper-aware of Graham's presence as he set the book on the nightstand. His movements were always so deliberate, so measured, like everything in his life had been carefully planned and executed. Everything except the way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching. "Mrs. Patterson asked us to draw our families," Isla continued, her green eyes, inherited from her late mother, bright with excitement. "And I drew you in mine, right next to Daddy and me." Claire's breath caught. She felt Graham's gaze intensify, heard the slight shift in his breathing. This was exactly the kind of moment that made her position in this household so complicated. Isla had lost her mother when she was only 4, and in the year Claire had been caring for her, the little girl had naturally begun to see her as more than just a caregiver. That's very sweet, sweetheart," Claire managed, her voice steady, despite the emotional storm brewing inside her chest. "But you know family doesn't always mean the same blood." Graham's voice cut through the room, quiet, but firm. His eyes never left Claire's face as he spoke. "Sometimes family means the people who choose to love us every single day." The words hung in the air like a confession neither of them was prepared for. Claire stood abruptly, smoothing down her simple blue sweater with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. "You should get some sleep, Isla. School tomorrow." She leaned down to kiss the little girl's forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender shampoo and childhood innocence. When she straightened, Graham was still watching her with an intensity that made her pulse race. "Good night," she whispered, not trusting her voice to be any stronger. She made it to the doorway before his voice stopped her. "Claire." The way he said her name, like a secret he'd been keeping, made her turn despite every instinct telling her to keep walking. Could I speak with you for a moment? Downstairs?" Her throat felt tight. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she headed down the curved staircase toward the living room, Claire's mind raced. In 11 months of working for Graham Sinclair, he had never asked to speak with her privately. Their conversations were always about Isla's schedule, her needs, her development. Professional, safe. This felt different. This felt like everything was about to change. The living room was bathed in the soft glow of table lamps, the space both elegant and lived in, filled with architectural books and Isla's scattered art supplies. Graham appeared in the doorway, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, A gesture she'd learned meant he was nervous about something. "Claire," he began, then stopped, running a hand through his dark hair. "There's something I need to ask you." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Was he going to fire her? Had she crossed a line? Had he noticed the way she'd been fighting her growing feelings for him? "There's a charity gala next Saturday night," he said carefully, his eyes searching her face. "It's for the children's hospital where Isla was treated after the accident. I usually go alone, but this year—" He paused, taking a breath that seemed to cost him something. "I don't want to take someone who doesn't know Isla, someone who doesn't understand what this family has been through." Claire's mind reeled. Was he asking her to? "I know it's unconventional," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "And I know it blurs the lines of our professional relationship. But Claire—" He stepped closer and she could see the vulnerability in his dark eyes, the careful hope he was trying to contain. "You're not just Isla's nanny anymore. You haven't been for a long time." The admission hit her like a physical force. "Graham, You can choose any dress you want," he said quickly, as if afraid she'd refuse before he could finish. "I'll take care of everything, but I want you there with me. Not as an employee. As—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Claire heard the words anyway. As the woman who had somehow become essential to both him and his daughter. As the person who had brought light back into their carefully guarded world. As something more than what they'd both been pretending she was. And in that moment, standing in the warm glow of his living room with the weight of 11 months of unspoken feelings pressing down on them both, Claire Bennett realized that everything was about to change, whether she was ready for it or not. Claire had said yes, and now she was standing in her tiny apartment bathroom at 6 in the morning, staring at her reflection and wondering if she'd lost her mind completely. The past 3 days had been a careful dance of stolen glances and professional conversations that carried undertones neither of them acknowledged out loud. Graham had been different, more present during breakfast, lingering a few extra moments when he came home from work, asking about her day with a genuine interest that made her pulse quicken. And now, in less than 12 hours, she would be walking into the most exclusive charity gala in the city, not as the help, not as the invisible caregiver in the background, but as Graham Sinclair's— what exactly? Date felt too presumptuous. Companion felt too formal. The uncertainty gnawed at her as she braided her damp hair, trying to calm the nervous energy that had been building since she'd whispered yes in his living room. Her phone buzzed on the small vanity. A text from her sister Melody in Portland. "Girl, you're going to a gala with your millionaire boss? Are you insane or brilliant? Either way, I need photos." Claire typed back quickly. "It's not what you think. It's complicated. The best love stories always are. Knock him dead, sis." Love story. Claire's chest tightened. Was that what this was becoming? At noon, her doorbell rang. Claire opened it to find a delivery man holding an elegant white box tied with silver ribbon. "Miss Bennett, delivery from Nordstrom." Her hands shook slightly as she signed for the package. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a note written in Graham's careful architect's handwriting. "I know you said you'd handle the dress, but I saw this and thought of you. If you don't like it, please don't feel obligated. But if you do, I think you'll be stunning. G." Claire lifted the tissue paper and gasped. The dress was breathtaking. Deep sapphire blue silk that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Not too revealing, not too conservative. Elegant in a way that spoke to quality rather than flash. The kind of dress that would make her feel beautiful without trying to be someone she wasn't. She held it up to herself in the mirror and felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to be seen as more than just competent, reliable Claire, to be seen as a woman worth pursuing. 2 hours before the gala, Claire's friend Jasmine arrived with a makeup kit and determined expression. "Honey, if you're going to do this, we're doing it right," Jasmine announced, setting up her supplies on Claire's small kitchen table. "Tell me everything." As Jasmine worked, carefully applying foundation and eyeshadow, Claire found herself talking about things she'd kept locked inside for months. The way Graham's eyes crinkled when Idla made him laugh. How he'd started bringing her coffee exactly the way she liked it without her ever asking. The night she'd found him in his study at midnight, staring at architectural plans with exhausted eyes, and how she'd quietly brought him tea and sat with him in comfortable silence until he was ready to go to bed. "Sweetie," Jasmine said, stepping back to examine her handiwork. "You're not just falling for this man. You're already gone." Claire opened her eyes and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was still recognizably herself but enhanced, her green eyes luminous, her blonde hair swept into a soft chignon that looked effortless but elegant. She looked like someone who belonged at a charity gala, someone who could stand beside Graham Sinclair and not seem out of place. The dress fit perfectly, hugging her curves in all the right places while still maintaining an air of sophistication. When she slipped on the delicate silver heels she'd borrowed from Jasmine, she felt transformed. At exactly 6:30, her doorbell rang. Claire took a deep breath, grabbed her small clutch, and opened the door. Graham stood there in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, and for a moment, neither of them moved. His dark eyes traveled over her slowly, drinking in every detail, and she watched something like wonder cross his face. "Claire," he breathed, his voice rough with an emotion she'd never heard from him before. God, you're beautiful." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Thank you. For the dress. It's perfect." "It's not the dress," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. It was never going to be the dress. The car ride to the hotel was filled with a tension that had nothing to do with nerves about the event, and everything to do with the man sitting beside her. Graham's hand rested on the seat between them, and twice Claire caught herself wanting to reach for it, to close that small distance and see what would happen. Instead, she focused on the city lights streaming past the window and tried to ignore the way her heart hammered every time he looked at her. "Claire," Graham said as they pulled up to the valet stand at the Grand Hotel, "before we go in, I need you to know something." She turned to face him, seeing the uncertainty in his expression. "I've been to dozens of these events," he continued. "Business networking, social obligations, charity requirements, but tonight," he paused, his jaw working as if he was struggling with the words. "Tonight feels different, because you're here." Before she could respond, the valet was opening her door. Graham appeared at her side, offering his arm with old-fashioned courtesy that made her feel cherished rather than merely escorted. As they walked through the hotel's opulent lobby toward the ballroom, Claire was acutely aware of the attention they were drawing. Women in expensive gowns glanced their way with curiosity, their eyes lingering on her with barely concealed assessment. Men nodded respectfully to Graham, their gazes shifting to her with interest and appreciation. But it was the way Graham carried himself beside her that took her breath away. Confident, proud even, as if having her on his arm was exactly where he wanted to be, as if she belonged there. They paused at the entrance to the ballroom, where photographers from local society magazines were capturing arrivals. Graham leaned down, his breath warm against her ear. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. Claire looked up at him, this man who had somehow become so much more than her employer, who was looking at her like she was precious and brave and worth the risk they were both taking, and felt something click into place inside her chest. "With you?" she whispered back. "I'm ready for anything." But as they stepped into the glittering ballroom filled with the city's elite, Claire had no idea that by the end of the night, everything she thought she knew about her place in Graham's world would be completely shattered, and that sometimes, being ready for anything still isn't enough to prepare you for everything. The moment they entered the ballroom, Claire understood why Graham had hesitated to bring anyone who didn't know his world. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables adorned with white orchids and gold accents. Women in designer gowns worth more than Claire's annual salary glided across marble floors, their jewelry catching the light like captured stars. Men in custom tuxedos discussed mergers and acquisitions between sips of champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's weekly groceries. This was Graham's world, a world of old money, careful connections, and unspoken rules she didn't know existed. "Breathe," Graham murmured against her ear, his hand settling protectively on the small of her back. "You belong here more than half these people do." Before Claire could ask what he meant, a striking woman in emerald green approached them, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Graham, darling." The woman air-kissed both his cheeks with practiced precision. "And who is this lovely creature you've brought to grace us with?" "Vivian, I'd like you to meet Claire Bennett," Graham said, his voice carrying a warmth that surprised Claire. "Claire, this is Vivian Ashworth. She sits on the hospital board with me." Vivian's calculating gaze swept over Claire from head to toe, taking in every detail of her dress, her jewelry, or lack thereof, and her obvious unfamiliarity with their social circle. "Charmed," Vivian said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "And what do you do, dear?" The question hung in the air like a test. Claire felt Graham tense beside her, ready to intervene, but something in Vivian's condescending tone sparked a quiet strength she didn't know she possessed. "I take care of what matters most," Claire replied evenly, accepting the handshake with confidence. "I work with children." It wasn't a lie exactly, and something in the way she said it with genuine pride rather than defensiveness seemed to catch Vivian off guard. "How noble," Vivian managed, clearly having expected a different response. "Well, you two enjoy the evening." As Vivian glided away, probably to gossip about Graham's mysterious date, Claire felt Graham's hand press more firmly against her back. "That was perfect," he said quietly, pride evident in his voice. "She was trying to make you feel small, and instead you reminded her what actually matters." Before Claire could respond, a waiter appeared with champagne. As Graham handed her a glass, their fingers brushed, sending that familiar electric current up her arm. "To new beginnings," Graham said, raising his glass. "To taking chances," Claire replied, surprised by her own boldness. Their eyes held as they drank, and Claire felt something shift between them. The pretense was falling away, replaced by something real and honest and terrifying in its intensity. The evening unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Graham introduced her to colleagues and friends, his hand never leaving the small of her back, his attention never straying far from her face. But what surprised Claire most was how naturally she fit into his world, when she stopped trying to prove she belonged, and simply let herself be present. During the silent auction, she found herself genuinely interested in the items being bid on: art pieces donated by local galleries, vacation packages to exotic destinations, and experiences money couldn't typically buy. When she paused to examine a painting of a mother reading to her child, Graham appeared at her side. "It reminds me of you," he said softly. "The way you look when you're reading to Isla." Heat bloomed in her chest. "Graham, I know we said we'd keep tonight professional," he continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "But I can't stop thinking about how right this feels. Having you here beside me." Claire's breath caught. Around them the auction continued, voices calling out bids and laughter filling the air. But all she could focus on was the man standing close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the vulnerability in his dark eyes. "It scares me," she admitted quietly. "How right it feels." "It scares me too," he confessed. "I haven't felt this way since before Emma died. I wasn't sure I could feel this way again." The mention of his late wife should have created distance between them, but instead it made Claire understand the magnitude of what he was offering her. A place in a heart that had been carefully guarded for 3 years. Their moment was interrupted by the sound of someone tapping a microphone. The auction had ended, and the evening's keynote speaker, a surgeon from the children's hospital, was preparing to address the crowd. As they found their assigned table, Claire noticed the way other guests watched them, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed speculation. She was the unknown variable in Graham Sinclair's carefully ordered life, and everyone wanted to solve the equation. During dinner, Claire found herself seated between Graham and a pleasant older gentleman named Theodore, who turned out to be a retired teacher with a passion for literacy programs. As they discussed the importance of reading to children, Claire's genuine enthusiasm and knowledge shone through. "You know," Theodore said, loud enough for the entire table to hear, "it's refreshing to meet someone who understands that the most important work isn't always the most visible work." Across the table, a woman in diamonds nodded approvingly. "I couldn't agree more. These days, everyone wants to be famous for being famous. It's rare to find someone dedicated to actually making a difference." Claire felt Graham's eyes on her as she engaged in conversation about childhood development and the importance of emotional stability in early years. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply talking about something she was passionate about, something she understood deeply. But as the evening progressed, she began to notice something unexpected. People were drawn to her, not because of her dress or her connection to Graham, but because of her authenticity, her genuine interest in others, her ability to listen without judgment and speak without pretense. When the dancing began, Graham extended his hand to her with old-fashioned courtesy. "May I?" he asked. The dance floor was crowded with couples moving to a slow jazz standard, but when Graham's arms closed around her, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. He was an excellent dancer, confident and graceful, and Claire found herself following his lead without conscious thought. "You're amazing," he murmured as they swayed together, his hand warm against the silk of her dress. "Do you realize that? Half the people here have been asking me about you." "Graham," she began, but he shook his head. Let me finish, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I brought you here thinking I was doing you a favor, giving you a chance to see this world. But Claire, he pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. You don't need to see this world. This world needs to see you. The words hit her like a physical force. Around them, other couples continued dancing. Conversations continued flowing. The evening continued unfolding exactly as planned. But for Claire, everything had suddenly shifted on its axis. She wasn't the poor nanny being given a glimpse of a life she could never have. She was a woman of value, of substance, of worth, a woman who brought something precious to any room she entered, a woman who deserved to be chosen. As the song ended and Graham's arms tightened around her for just a moment longer than propriety demanded, Claire realized something that both thrilled and terrified her. Tonight hadn't just changed how others saw her, it had changed how she saw herself, and there was no going back from that kind of awakening. Claire woke up in her own bed with sapphire silk draped over her bedroom chair and the taste of possibility still lingering on her lips. The gala had ended at midnight with Graham walking her to her apartment door, his hand lingering on her lower back as she fumbled with her keys. For a moment they'd stood in the dim hallway light, the air between them charged with everything they weren't quite ready to say. He'd lifted his hand to touch her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with reverent gentleness. Thank you, he'd whispered, for tonight, for in everything. Then he'd kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it had nearly undone her, and walked away, leaving Claire standing in her doorway with her heart hammering and her entire world shifted off its axis. Now at 7 in the morning, reality was creeping back in with the Sunday sunlight filtering through her small bedroom window. Her phone buzzed. A text from Graham. I hope you slept well. Isla's asking for pancakes and stories about princesses who dance at royal balls. I think she suspects something magical happened last night. She's not wrong. Claire stared at the message, her chest tightening with a mixture of joy and terror. How did they navigate this? How did she go back to being just the nanny when everything between them had fundamentally changed? Another text appeared. Take your time this morning. Come when you're ready. We need to talk. Those 4 words, we need to talk, sent ice through her veins. In her experience, nothing good ever followed that phrase. An hour later, Claire stood outside the Sinclair mansion, her hand frozen on the brass doorknob she'd turned hundreds of times before. Everything looked the same. The manicured lawn, the elegant architecture, the black SUV in the circular driveway. But she felt like a different person approaching a different life. Before she could lose her nerve, the door swung open. Miss Claire! Isla launched herself into Claire's arms with characteristic 7-year-old enthusiasm. Daddy said you went to a fancy party last night. Did you wear a beautiful dress? Did you dance? Were there real princes there? Over Isla's head, Claire's eyes met Graham's. He stood in the doorway of his study, still in pajama pants and a faded Princeton t-shirt, his dark hair mussed from sleep. The sight of him looking so normal, so domestic, so approachable, made her heart clench with longing. There was one, Claire said softly, never breaking eye contact with Graham. There was one prince there. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, pleasure, recognition of the admission she'd just made. Come on. Isla tugged at Claire's hand. Daddy's making pancakes, but they're all wonky because he's not very good at it. He needs help. In the kitchen, Claire found evidence of Graham's culinary struggles. Batter splattered across the granite countertops, a stack of misshapen pancakes on a plate, and the smell of something slightly burned lingering in the air. I thought I'd give you the morning off, Graham said, attempting to flip another pancake and watching it fold in half. Turns out there's a reason you usually handle breakfast. Despite her nerves, Claire smiled. There was something endearing about seeing Graham Sinclair, successful architect, millionaire, master of his universe, defeated by breakfast food. Here, she said, moving to stand beside him at the stove. The trick is to wait until the edges look set before you try to flip. Their hands brushed as she took the spatula from him, and the contact sent that familiar electricity up her arm. Graham didn't step away. Instead, he moved closer, his chest nearly touching her back as she worked. Claire, he began, his voice low enough that Isla, now coloring at the kitchen table, couldn't hear. About last night. Daddy, look, Isla interrupted, holding up her drawing. I drew you and Miss Claire dancing. Claire's breath caught. The child's artwork showed 2 stick figures in a large room, one in a blue dress and one in black, their hands connected. Above them, Isla had drawn stars and hearts in crayon. It's beautiful, sweetheart, Graham said, his voice tight with emotion. "You're very talented. Are you going to marry Miss Claire?" Isla asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood. The spatula slipped from Claire's hand, clattering onto the stove. The silence that followed stretched like a held breath, filled with all the complications they hadn't figured out how to address. "Isla," Graham said carefully, "Miss Claire and we're still figuring things out. But you like her, right?" Isla pressed. Like her. Claire turned to face them, her cheeks burning. Graham's eyes met hers, and she saw her own uncertainty reflected there, mixed with something deeper, something that looked dangerously like hope. "Yes," Graham said quietly, his gaze never leaving Claire's face. "I like her." The simple words, spoken with such sincerity, nearly brought tears to Claire's eyes. "Good," Isla announced, returning to her coloring as if she'd just solved a complex problem. "Because she makes you smile more, and she makes the best chocolate chip cookies, and she reads bedtime stories with different voices for all the characters." After breakfast, while Isla played in the backyard, Graham led Claire to his study. The room smelled of leather and coffee, filled with architectural drawings and books that spoke to his careful, methodical mind. He closed the door behind them, and suddenly the space felt intimate and charged. "We do need to talk," he said, leaning against his desk with his arms crossed. "About what this means. About how we move forward." Claire perched on the edge of the leather chair across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Graham, I need you to know that I never planned for this to happen. I never wanted to complicate things." "Stop," he interrupted, pushing off from the desk to kneel in front of her chair. His hands covered hers, warm and steady. "Don't apologize for feeling something real. Don't apologize for making me feel alive again." "But what about Isla?" Claire's voice cracked. "What about professional boundaries? What if this doesn't work out? What if it does?" Graham's thumb stroked across her knuckles. "What if we stop being so afraid of ruining something good that we never give it a chance to become something extraordinary?" He stood, pulling her up with him, his hands framing her face with the same reverence he'd shown the night before. "Claire, I haven't felt this way about anyone since Emma died. For 3 years, I convinced myself that what we had was once in a lifetime, that I'd had my chance at love and lost it. But then you walked into our lives, and everything changed. I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," he admitted, terrified. "But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been." Through the study window, they could see Isla in the backyard, pushing her doll on the swing set Graham had built for her. The little girl who had already drawn them into her family portrait, who had asked with innocent directness if they were going to get married, who had somehow seen what the adults were too afraid to acknowledge. "She's already attached to you," Graham said softly, following Claire's gaze. "If we do this, if we try to build something real together, and it doesn't work out, it would break her heart," Claire finished. "And yours, and mine." Graham's hands tightened on her face. "But Claire, what if it doesn't break? What if instead of protecting ourselves from getting hurt, we choose to believe in something beautiful?" Claire looked into his eyes, dark, honest, full of a vulnerability that took her breath away, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay? Okay. Let's try. Let's see what we could be." Graham's smile was like sunrise breaking over water, transforming his entire face. He leaned down, his forehead touching hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "Real dates, getting to know each other outside of this house, building something that belongs to us, not just to your job description. And Isla, we take it slow. We let her adjust. We make sure she feels secure and loved throughout whatever this becomes." His voice softened. "But Claire, she already loves you. That part isn't going to change no matter what happens between us." Outside, Isla's laughter carried on the morning breeze, bright and uncomplicated and full of the kind of joy that comes from feeling safe in your world. And for the first time since she'd said yes to the gala, Claire allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be part of building that safe world into something even more beautiful. But as Graham's lips found hers in their first real kiss, tender and promising and full of carefully contained passion, neither of them could have predicted that their biggest challenge wouldn't come from within their carefully constructed new beginning. It would come from the outside world that wasn't quite ready to accept that love doesn't always follow the rules. 3 weeks after their first kiss, Claire was learning that dating your employer while living in his world was like trying to dance on a tightrope. Beautiful when it worked, terrifying when it didn't. Graham had kept his promise about doing things right. Real dates that had nothing to do with Isla's schedule or household responsibilities. Coffee at the small cafe near her apartment where he looked delightfully out of place among college students and struggling artists. A quiet dinner at an Italian restaurant where they talked for hours about everything, except the careful balance they were trying to maintain between personal and professional. But it was the small moments that were unraveling her. The way his hand would brush hers when passing Isla's breakfast plate. The soft good morning kisses when he thought Isla wasn't looking. The way he'd started texting her goodnight even though she was just upstairs in the guest room she'd been using more frequently. Everything was perfect, which, in Claire's experience, usually meant something was about to go very wrong. That something knocked on the front door at exactly 9:15 on a Tuesday morning, when Graham was already at work and Isla was at school. Claire answered, expecting a delivery or perhaps one of the neighbors. Instead, she found herself face to face with a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a high-end magazine. Perfectly styled auburn hair, designer suit, and the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be Claire," the woman said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Linda Morrison. I work with Graham at the firm." Claire recognized the name immediately. Linda was Graham's business partner, the woman who'd helped him build his architectural practice into one of the most successful in the city. She was also, according to office gossip that Isla had innocently repeated, someone who'd been hoping for more than a professional relationship with Graham for quite some time. "Nice to meet you," Claire said carefully, stepping back to let Linda into the foyer. "Graham's not here right now. Actually, I came to see you." Linda's smile sharpened slightly. "I was hoping we could have a little chat, woman to woman." Every instinct Claire possessed started screaming warnings, but she led Linda to the living room anyway, offering coffee that was politely declined. "I'll get right to the point," Linda said, settling into one of the leather chairs with practiced elegance. "I'm concerned about Graham." "Concerned? He's been different lately, distracted, making decisions that aren't in his best interest." Linda's gaze swept over Claire with calculating assessment. "I understand you two have been spending time together outside of your professional relationship." Heat flooded Claire's cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "My relationship with Graham is between Graham and me. Under normal circumstances, I'd agree," Linda continued smoothly. "But these aren't normal circumstances, are they? You work for him. You live in his house. You take care of his daughter. The power dynamic is complicated." "There's no power dynamic," Claire said firmly. "We're both adults making choices." Linda laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Claire, may I call you Claire? You seem like a sweet girl. Really. But do you have any idea what Graham's life is actually like? The expectations, the social obligations, the kind of woman who typically becomes part of his world?" The words hit like calculated blows, each one designed to highlight everything Claire had been trying not to think about. "Last month's charity gala was lovely," Linda continued, her tone conversational but edged with steel. "I heard you made quite an impression, but that was one night, one carefully orchestrated evening where you could play dress-up and pretend to belong. Real life is different." "What do you want?" Claire asked bluntly. "I want what's best for Graham, and for Isla." Linda leaned forward slightly. "That little girl has been through enough trauma. She lost her mother when she was barely old enough to understand death. She doesn't need to get attached to someone who's inevitably going to leave." "I'm not going to leave, aren't you?" Linda's eyebrows rose. "When the novelty wears off? When Graham realizes that dating the help was just a phase? When his clients start asking questions about his judgment? When Isla starts school events and you're expected to play the role of stepmother to people who will never accept you as anything more? Then the nanny who got lucky." Each word was like a needle finding its mark. Claire felt her carefully constructed confidence beginning to crumble. "You're a caregiver, Claire. It's what you do. It's who you are. You see someone in pain and you want to fix them. But Graham doesn't need fixing. He needs stability, consistency. Someone who understands his world because she was born to it." Linda stood, smoothing down her skirt with practiced precision. "I'm not saying you're a bad person. You're probably quite lovely. But this fantasy you're living, it's not sustainable. And the longer it goes on, the more people are going to get hurt." She moved toward the door, then paused, turning back with what might have been genuine sympathy in her eyes. "Do you really think you're the first woman Graham's been attracted to since Emma died? There have been others, Claire. Casual things that never went anywhere because deep down, he knows what he needs. What Isla needs." Linda's voice softened in a way that was somehow more devastating than her earlier attacks. "Save yourself the heartbreak, honey. End this, before it ends you." After Linda left, Claire sat in the empty living room surrounded by the elegant furniture and tasteful decor that represented a world she was still learning to navigate. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hallway, marking time in a house that suddenly felt less like home and more like a beautiful prison. Her phone buzzed. A text from Graham. "Missing you today. Thinking about dinner tomorrow night. Just us. That new place downtown you mentioned?" Claire stared at the message, Linda's words echoing in her mind. "You're probably quite lovely, but this fantasy you're living, it's not sustainable." Was that what this was? A fantasy? A beautiful dream that she'd mistaken for reality? When Isla came home from school, chattering excitedly about her art project and asking if Claire would help her with math homework, Claire found herself studying the little girl's face with new eyes. What would happen to Isla when this inevitably fell apart? When Claire proved that Linda was right and she couldn't handle being part of Graham's real world? "Miss Claire?" Isla's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Are you okay? You look sad." "I'm fine, sweetheart," Claire managed, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about grown-up things." "Is it about Daddy?" The innocent question hit like a physical blow. How much did Isla understand? How much had she already invested in the idea of Claire becoming a permanent part of their family? "Sometimes grown-up feelings are complicated," Claire said carefully. Isla nodded solemnly, then brightened. "But that's okay. Daddy says the best things are usually complicated, like building houses and loving people and making really good chocolate chip cookies." That evening, when Graham came home, Claire watched him interact with his daughter, patient, loving, completely present, and felt her heart break a little more. He was a good father, a good man. He deserved someone who could be a true partner in his world, not someone who would always be learning the steps while everyone else danced naturally. "Hey," Graham said softly, appearing beside her in the kitchen, where she was mechanically loading the dishwasher. "You've been quiet tonight. Everything okay?" Claire looked up at him. This man who had somehow become everything she'd never dared to want, and felt the weight of Linda's words pressing down on her chest. "Graham," she began, then stopped. "How did you tell someone you were falling in love with that maybe love wasn't enough? What is it?" His hands framed her face with the gentleness that had become so familiar, so precious. "Talk to me. What if Linda's right?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Graham's expression darkened. "Linda was here? This morning she came to see me." Claire's voice cracked. "She thinks I'm going to hurt you, hurt Isla, that I don't belong in your world and I'm just playing dress-up until reality sets in. And you believe her?" "I don't know what to believe anymore." The confession hurt to say out loud. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm just the rebound, the safe choice while you figure out what you really want. Graham's hands dropped from her face, and for a moment something that looked like hurt flashed in his eyes. "Is that really what you think this is?" he asked quietly. Claire wanted to say no, wanted to throw her arms around him and forget every poisonous word Linda had planted in her mind. But doubt, once introduced, was a powerful thing. "I think," she said carefully, "that maybe we need to slow down, take a step back and really think about what we're doing." The silence that followed felt like the end of something beautiful. And maybe, Claire thought as she watched something close off in Graham's expression, that was exactly what it was. The next 2 weeks felt like living in a house made of glass. Everything was transparent, fragile, and one wrong move away from shattering completely. Claire had moved back to her apartment, returning each morning to take care of Isla with professional precision that fooled no one. She arrived exactly on time, performed her duties flawlessly, and left the moment Graham returned from work. No lingering conversations, no stolen moments, no goodnight kisses that made her forget why maintaining distance was supposed to be the smart thing to do. Graham, for his part, had retreated behind the same polite reserve he'd maintained during her first months working for him. "Good morning, Claire. Thank you for taking care of Isla. See you tomorrow." Each interaction was courteous, efficient, and completely devoid of the warmth that had been growing between them. It was exactly what Claire had said she wanted. So why did it feel like dying by inches? "Daddy's sad," Isla announced one afternoon as Claire helped her with homework at the kitchen table. The 7-year-old had the uncanny ability to observe adult emotions with startling clarity. He keeps staring at his phone like he wants to say something but doesn't know how. Claire's chest tightened. "Sometimes grown-ups go through difficult periods, sweetheart. Is it because you don't live here anymore?" The direct question hit like a physical blow. Claire set down the pencil she'd been holding and looked into Isla's green eyes. So much like her mother's, so full of innocent concern. "It's complicated," Claire said gently. That's what he said too. Isla frowned, her small brow furrowed with worry. But I don't understand why complicated has to mean sad. Can't you just uncomplicate it? If only it were that simple. That evening, as Claire prepared to leave, she found Graham waiting by the front door. He looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from fighting battles with yourself and losing. "Claire," he said quietly, "can we talk? Please?" Every instinct told her to say no, to maintain the distance that was supposed to protect them both, but the raw vulnerability in his voice undid her. 5 minutes, she agreed. He led her to his study, closing the door behind them. The room smelled like coffee and late nights, filled with architectural drawings and the comfortable chaos of a man passionate about his work. How many times had she brought him tea in this room? How many quiet conversations had they shared here before everything became complicated? "I've been thinking," Graham began, leaning against his desk with his arms crossed. That gesture she'd learned meant he was trying to protect himself. "About what Linda said, about what you said." Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. "Graham, let me finish." His voice was steady but strained. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we did rush into this. Maybe I wasn't thinking clearly about the implications for Isla, for your career, for everything." The words should have been relief, vindication, proof that stepping back had been the mature, responsible choice. Instead, they felt like knives. "So we're done?" Claire asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded when her world was crumbling. "I don't want us to be done," Graham said quietly, "but I also don't want to be selfish. I don't want to put you in a position where you feel trapped between what you want and what you think is right." "What I want?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Graham's eyes met hers, and for a moment, all the careful distance they'd been maintaining evaporated. "Tell me," he said, his voice rough. "Tell me what you want, Claire. Not what Linda thinks you should want. Not what's professionally appropriate. Not what's best for everyone else. What do you want?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with everything they'd been dancing around for weeks. "I want," Claire began, then stopped, because admitting what she wanted felt like stepping off a cliff with no guarantee that anything would catch her fall. Before she could continue, the study door burst open. "Daddy, I can't find my—" Isla stopped short, her gaze darting between her father and Claire. Even at 7, she could read the tension in the room. "Sorry, I was looking for my reading book." "It's on your nightstand, sweetheart," Graham said gently. "Go get ready for bed. I'll be up to say goodnight in a few minutes." Isla nodded but didn't leave immediately. Instead, she looked at Claire with an expression far too wise for her age. "Miss Claire," she said softly, "will you read me a story tonight? You do all the different voices and it makes the characters feel real." Claire's throat tightened. "I should probably head home, sweetheart." "Please?" Isla's voice was small, hopeful. "Just one story?" Claire looked at Graham, who nodded almost imperceptibly. How could she say no to this little girl who had somehow become so important to her? Who deserved consistency and love and adults who didn't let their own fears ruin beautiful things? "One story," Claire agreed. 20 minutes later, Claire sat on the edge of Isla's bed reading about a brave princess who had to choose between safety and adventure. Isla was curled up against her side, her small hand resting trustingly on Claire's arm, and Graham stood in the doorway watching them with an expression that made Claire's heart ache. This was what Linda had been warning her about. This moment, this feeling of rightness, of family, of belonging somewhere she'd never dared to dream she could fit. The dangerous illusion that love could be enough to bridge any gap. "And the princess realized," Claire read, her voice soft in the dim room, "that the scariest adventures are often the ones that lead us exactly where we're supposed to be. Like when you came to take care of me," Isla murmured sleepily. "That was Daddy's adventure." Claire's breath caught. Beside the doorway, Graham went very still. "And you're our happy ending," Isla added, her eyes drifting closed. "Right, Daddy?" The silence that followed was deafening. Claire gently extracted herself from Isla's sleepy embrace, tucking the covers around the little girl's shoulders. When she turned toward the door, Graham was gone. She found him in the kitchen, standing at the window overlooking the backyard, his shoulders tense with unspoken emotion. "She doesn't understand," Claire said quietly. "She's just a child. She doesn't know how complicated this is." "Maybe that's the problem," Graham replied without turning around. "Maybe we're the ones making it complicated." "Graham, do you know what I thought about every day for the past 2 weeks?" He turned to face her, his eyes bright with unshed emotion. "Not the architecture project that could make or break my firm. Not the social expectations or what Linda thinks or any of the 100 reasons why this might be a mistake. I thought about you. About the way you laugh when Isla tells terrible knock-knock jokes. About how you make me want to be better than I've been. About how empty this house feels when you're not in it. Claire's hands trembled at her sides. But what if Linda's right? What if I can't handle your world? What if I end up hurting Isla when this falls apart? What if you don't? Graham stepped closer, his voice intense but gentle. What if instead of protecting ourselves from getting hurt, we choose to believe that some things are worth the risk? I'm scared, Claire whispered. So am I. Terrified. Graham's hands framed her face with a tenderness she'd missed desperately. But I'm more scared of losing you because I was too much of a coward to fight for something real. Claire closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. What do? We try again, Graham said simply. But this time we don't let other people's fears become ours. This time, we trust that what we have is strong enough to handle whatever comes. And if it's not, Graham's thumb stroked across her cheekbones, then at least we'll know we were brave enough to try. Claire opened her eyes, looking into his face. This man who had somehow become her safe harbor and her greatest adventure all at once. Linda's warning still echoed in her mind, along with all the very real obstacles they would face. But stronger than fear was the memory of Isla's sleepy voice saying, "You're our happy ending," and the look in Graham's eyes that made her believe in possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay? Okay, let's be brave." Claire's voice grew stronger. "Let's trust this, let's trust us." Graham's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. He leaned down, resting his forehead against hers. "Together?" he asked. "Together," she confirmed. But as Graham's arms closed around her and Claire let herself believe in beautiful possibilities again, neither of them could have predicted that their biggest test was still coming, because sometimes loving someone means fighting not just for your relationship, but for the right to have it at all. Claire should have known that happiness this perfect couldn't stay hidden forever. 2 months after their reconciliation, she and Graham had found a rhythm that felt both natural and revolutionary. She'd moved back into the guest room at his request. "Isla sleeps better knowing you're here, and honestly so do I." And they'd been navigating their relationship with the careful intentionality of two people who'd almost lost something precious. Their first official date had been a quiet dinner at a small bistro 40 minutes outside the city, where Graham had held her hand across the table and told her about his dreams for the firm, his fears about raising Isla alone, and the way she'd changed everything just by being herself. Their first "I love you" had happened 3 weeks later, whispered against her hair after Isla had fallen asleep between them during a movie night, as natural and inevitable as breathing. Everything was falling into place, which was exactly when the universe decided to remind them that privacy was a luxury they couldn't afford forever. The photo appeared in the society section of the Sunday paper, accompanied by a headline that made Claire's blood turn to ice. "Millionaire Architect's New Romance, a Love Story or a Modern-Day Cinderella Tale." Graham found the newspaper first, spread across the kitchen counter when Claire came down for her morning coffee. His face was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders as he read. "How bad is it?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "See for yourself," he said quietly, sliding the paper toward her. The photo had been taken the previous weekend at Isla's school carnival. Claire and Graham stood side by side, watching Isla attempt to knock down bottles with a baseball, their hands linked casually, both of them laughing at something Isla had said. It was a moment of pure, unguarded happiness, the kind of candid shot that revealed more than any posed portrait ever could. But it was the accompanying article that made Claire's heart sink. Graham Sinclair, 35, heir to the Sinclair architectural dynasty and widower of the late Emma Sinclair, has been spotted around town with a mystery woman whose sources confirm is 29-year-old Claire Bennett, employed as a nanny in the Sinclair household. The pair were photographed at several local establishments over the past month, raising questions about the nature of their relationship and the appropriateness of romantic involvement between employer and employee. "Oh God," Claire breathed. "They make it sound so sordid, like I'm some kind of opportunist who—" "Stop," Graham's voice was firm. "Don't give them the power to define what we have." But Claire was already reading further, her stomach churning with each carefully crafted insinuation. Friends of the family expressed concern about the speed of Mr. Sinclair's new attachment, particularly given his young daughter's need for stability following her mother's tragic death 3 years ago. "Graham is a wonderful father, but he's vulnerable right now," says family friend Linda Morrison, who works closely with Sinclair at his architectural firm. We just hope he's making decisions with his head and not just his heart. She gave them a quote, Claire said, her voice hollow. Linda actually talked to the press about us. Graham's jaw tightened. I'll handle Linda. Will you? Because this, Claire gestured at the newspaper, this is exactly what she warned me would happen. The scrutiny, the judgment, the implications that I'm not good enough for your world. Their opinions don't matter, Graham said, moving around the kitchen island to pull her into his arms. What matters is us. What matters is that I love you and you love me, and Isla is happy and thriving with you in our lives. But what about your business? Your reputation? What if this affects your clients, your partnerships? Then we'll deal with it, Graham interrupted. Together. Before Claire could respond, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Isla appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for school in her favorite purple dress, her dark hair pulled back in the intricate braid Claire had taught her to do. What's wrong? Isla asked immediately, her 7-year-old intuition picking up on the tension. You both look worried. Graham folded the newspaper quickly, but not before Isla caught sight of their photo. Hey, that's us, she exclaimed, brightening. From the carnival. Why are we in the newspaper? Claire and Graham exchanged glances. How did you explain to a child that some people thought love was newsworthy, particularly when it didn't fit their narrow definitions of appropriate? Sometimes when adults care about each other, people want to write stories about it, Graham said carefully, even when it's private. Isla frowned, processing this. But that's silly. Of course you care about each other. Anyone can see that. She looked between them with the matter-of-fact certainty of childhood. Are you worried because some people might not understand? Something like that, Claire admitted. Well, they're just not paying attention then, Isla declared. Mrs. Patterson at school says that love makes families stronger, not weaker. And we're stronger now than we were before Miss Claire came to live with us. Right, Daddy? Graham's eyes met Claire's over Isla's head, and she saw her own emotions reflected there. Love, determination, and a fierce protectiveness for the life they'd built together. Right, he said softly. We're definitely stronger. The rest of the morning passed in careful normalcy. Graham left for work with a longer than usual kiss for Claire and extra hugs for Isla. Claire drove Isla to school, where she noticed a few other parents glancing their way with barely concealed curiosity. By the time she returned to the house, her phone was buzzing with missed calls and text messages. Her sister Melody, "Girl, you're famous. Mom saw the paper and nearly dropped her coffee. Call me." Her best friend Jasmine, "Is this why you've been glowing lately? I'm so proud of you for following your heart." 3 unknown numbers that she didn't dare answer. And then, at 11:30, the doorbell rang. Claire opened it to find a perfectly groomed blonde woman with a press badge and a cameraman standing behind her. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I was hoping we could ask you a few questions about your relationship with Mr. Sinclair." "No comment," Claire said immediately, starting to close the door. "We're particularly interested in addressing some of the concerns raised about appropriate boundaries between employers and employees," the reporter continued, her foot strategically positioned to prevent the door from closing, "and about your qualifications to potentially become a mother figure to young Isla Sinclair." The words hit like a slap. Claire's qualifications? As if loving a child and caring for her well-being for over a year meant nothing because she hadn't been born into the right social circle. "My personal life is not up for public discussion," Claire said firmly. "Please leave. Ms. Bennett, there are questions about your background, your education, your family's financial situation. Get off my property." Graham's voice cut through the reporter's words like steel. He'd appeared behind the news crew, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Now, Mr. Sinclair, if we could just ask—" "I said now." Graham stepped protectively in front of Claire, his presence radiating authority. "And if any of you show up at my daughter's school or at this house again, I'll have you arrested for harassment." The reporter and cameraman retreated, but not before Jennifer Walsh called out, "The public has a right to know about public figures' personal lives, Mr. Sinclair." Graham slammed the door and immediately pulled Claire into his arms. "Are you okay?" he asked, his hands running over her hair, her shoulders, as if reassuring himself that she was unharmed. "They asked about my qualifications," Claire said, her voice shaking with anger and hurt. "To be a mother figure to Isla, as if the past year meant nothing, as if love wasn't qualification enough." "Listen to me," Graham said, cupping her face in his hands. "You are the most qualified person in the world to love my daughter. Not because of your education or your background or any arbitrary standard they want to apply. Because you see her. You know her. You've been there for every nightmare, every triumph, every ordinary Tuesday that makes up a childhood. But what if they're right? What if I'm not enough? Stop. Graham's voice was fierce. You are enough. You are more than enough. You are everything we never knew we needed. That afternoon, Graham's phone rang incessantly. Clients wanting to discuss the situation. Board members concerned about public perception. Linda calling repeatedly, though Graham let every call go to voicemail. When Isla came home from school, she was unusually quiet. Some kids at school said they saw you on TV, she told Claire as they sat down for afternoon snacks. They said people are talking about whether you should be allowed to love us. Claire's heart broke. What did you tell them? I told them that love isn't something you get allowed to do, Isla said with startling wisdom. It's something that just happens when people are good to each other. And you're the goodest person I know. That evening, after Isla was asleep, Claire and Graham sat in his study, surrounded by the architectural drawings and books that represented his life's work. Everything felt fragile, uncertain, as if the foundation they'd been building could crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. I can't let this destroy your career, Claire said quietly, or affect Isla, if stepping back would make things easier. No, Graham's voice was absolute. We don't run. We don't hide. We don't let other people's narrow-mindedness dictate how we live our lives. But Graham, I love you, he interrupted. I love you, and I'm not ashamed of that. I'm not going to apologize for finding happiness with the most incredible woman I've ever known, just because some people think love should follow their rules. Claire looked at him, this man who was willing to fight the world for their right to be together, and felt something click into place in her chest. What do we do? She asked. Graham reached for her hand, linking their fingers together with deliberate intention. We live our truth, he said simply, openly, honestly, and we trust that what we have is strong enough to weather whatever storm comes next. But as they sat together in the quiet of his study, both of them knew that the real storm was just beginning. Because sometimes, loving someone means not just fighting for your relationship, but fighting for your right to exist in a world that doesn't want to make room for your kind of love. The breaking point came on a Thursday, exactly 1 week after the newspaper article in the form of a phone call that changed everything. Claire was in the kitchen, helping Isla with her science project about butterflies. When Graham's phone rang, she could hear his voice from the study, controlled at first, then increasingly tense. That's unacceptable, he said, his voice carrying down the hallway. We've worked together for 12 years, Richard. 12 years. Isla looked up from the poster board she was decorating with crayon drawings of monarchs and swallowtails. Daddy sounds upset, she observed with the matter-of-fact perception of childhood. Sometimes grown-ups have difficult conversations about work, Claire said gently, though her stomach was already knotting with dread. 20 minutes later, Graham appeared in the kitchen doorway. His face was carefully composed, but Claire had learned to read the signs, the tight line of his jaw, the way his hands were shoved deep in his pockets, the exhaustion in his eyes that spoke of battles fought and lost. Daddy? Isla looked up from her project. Are you okay? I'm fine, sweetheart, Graham said, summoning a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Your butterflies look beautiful. Did you know that monarchs migrate thousands of miles every year? They're incredibly strong. Isla beamed, distracted by the praise, but Claire saw the message in Graham's words. Some creatures had to fight incredible odds just to survive. After Isla went to bed, Claire found Graham in his study, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured backyard. A half-empty glass of scotch sat on his desk beside architectural plans that remained untouched. Tell me, Claire said quietly, settling into the chair across from his desk. Graham was silent for a long moment, then turned to face her. The Meridian Project, he said finally. The shopping complex downtown that would have secured our firm's future for the next 5 years. Richard Morrison, Linda's father, was the primary investor. Claire's blood turned cold. Was? He pulled out today. Said he has concerns about my personal judgment affecting my professional capabilities. Graham's voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the fury underneath. 12 years of successful projects, millions in revenue generated, and suddenly my personal life makes me unemployable. Graham, Claire's voice broke. This was exactly what Linda had warned her about. The professional consequences, the damage to his reputation. It gets worse, Graham continued. 3 other clients called this afternoon. The Hendersons want to reassess their home renovation. The city council is reviewing our proposal for the new library. Even the hospital board, the same people who praised you at the gala, are suddenly concerned about image and public perception. Each revelation felt like a physical blow. Claire watched the man she loved describe the systematic destruction of everything he'd worked to build, and knew with devastating clarity that she was the cause. "How much?" she asked quietly. "What? How much business will you lose because of me?" Graham's eyes flashed. "This isn't your fault, Claire. This is about small-minded people who can't accept that love doesn't follow their antiquated rules." "That's not what I asked." Claire's voice was steady despite the chaos in her chest. "How much?" Graham was quiet for a long moment. "Potentially. Half our annual revenue. Maybe more." The number hit her like a physical force. Half his business. The livelihood of his employees. The financial security he'd built for Isla's future. All of it at risk because he'd fallen in love with the wrong woman. "There's more," Graham said quietly. "Linda submitted a formal complaint to the architectural board. She's alleging that my personal relationship with you represents a conflict of interest that could affect my professional judgment. Can she do that? She can try. The board will investigate, which means more publicity, more questions, more damage to our reputation." Graham ran a hand through his hair. "She's being thorough." Claire stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was peaceful, orderly, beautiful. Inside, their world was crumbling. "I should leave," she said quietly. "What?" "I should leave. Take a job somewhere else. Let this all blow over." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she forced them out anyway. "If I'm not here, if we're not together, then there's no story. No scandal. Your business relationships can recover." "Absolutely not." Graham was on his feet, moving toward her. "We don't run from this, Claire. We don't let them win. They've already won." The words exploded out of her. "Don't you see? Linda was right about everything. I don't belong in your world. I'm destroying your career, threatening your daughter's financial security, ruining everything you've worked for." "You're not ruining anything," Graham said fiercely. "You're the best thing that's happened to us." "At what cost?" Claire's voice cracked. "Your business? Your reputation? Isla's college fund? None of that matters without you. It matters to me." The admission tore from her throat. "It matters to me that loving you is hurting you, that being with me is destroying the life you built for your daughter." Graham reached for her, but she stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself as if she could hold her breaking heart together through sheer force of will. "What if Isla starts getting bullied at school because of this?" Claire continued. "What if your colleagues stop respecting you? What if you lose everything because you chose me? Then we'll build something new," Graham said desperately. "Together. With what? If you lose your major clients, if the board finds against you, what then? You'll resent me for what I cost you, maybe not today, maybe not next year, but eventually. That's not true, isn't it?" Claire's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for days. "Be honest, Graham. If someone had told you a year ago that dating me would cost you half your business, would you have taken that risk?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "I love you," Graham said finally, his voice raw. "I love you more than any business deal or client relationship or professional reputation. None of it means anything without you and Isla. But Isla needs security. She needs her college fund and her beautiful house and the life you've built for her. She doesn't need a stepmother who cost her father everything he worked for. She needs you," Graham said desperately. "We both do." "No," Claire whispered. "You need someone who fits into your world without destroying it. Someone who makes your life better, not harder. You do make my life better. I make your life complicated. There's a difference." The study door creaked open, and both adults turned to see Isla standing in the doorway in her princess pajamas, her dark hair mussed from sleep. "I had a bad dream," she said softly, then noticed the tension in the room. "Are you fighting?" "No, sweetheart," Graham said quickly. "Just talking about grown-up things." Isla looked between them with eyes too wise for her 7 years. "It's about the mean people who don't want Miss Claire to love us, isn't it?" Claire's breath caught. How much had Isla overheard? How much did she understand about the forces trying to tear their family apart? "Some people don't understand our family," Graham said carefully. "But we don't have to listen to them, right?" Isla looked directly at Claire. "You're not going to leave us because some people are being mean, are you?" The question hung in the air like a plea. Claire looked at this little girl who had somehow become the center of her world, who had drawn her into family portraits and asked innocent questions about marriage and called her family without hesitation. Claire began, then stopped. Because how do you tell a child that sometimes love isn't enough? That sometimes loving someone means walking away? Miss Claire? Isla's voice was small, uncertain. Claire knelt down to Isla's level, taking the little girl's hands in hers. Do you remember the story we read about the butterfly? Isla nodded. Sometimes, Claire said carefully, butterflies have to make very difficult journeys to protect the people they love, even when it hurts. Understanding dawned in Isla's green eyes, followed immediately by tears. But butterflies come back, she whispered. In the story, they always come back. Claire's heart shattered. Sometimes they do. Promise me, Isla said urgently. Promise me you'll come back. Claire looked into the face of the child she'd come to love as her own, then up at Graham, who was watching them both with an expression of absolute devastation. I promise, she whispered, though she had no idea how she could possibly keep such a promise. But that night, as she held Isla until the little girl fell asleep, and later as she lay awake in the guest room listening to Graham pace the hallway, Claire made a decision that broke her heart, but felt like the only choice she had left. Some butterflies had to migrate alone, even when it meant leaving everything they loved behind. Claire left on a Sunday morning, when the house was still quiet and the autumn light filtered through the windows like liquid gold. She'd spent the past 3 days pretending everything was normal, helping Isla with homework, making Graham's coffee exactly the way he liked it, reading bedtime stories with all the different voices that made the characters come alive. But beneath the surface, she'd been preparing for the hardest thing she'd ever done. Her suitcase sat packed and hidden in the guest room closet. Her resignation letter, typed and retyped a dozen times, lay sealed on the kitchen counter, and her heart felt like it was being slowly torn in half, one thread at a time. Isla was at a sleepover with her friend Madison, blissfully unaware that when she came home, the woman she'd called family would be gone. Graham had left early for an emergency meeting with his remaining clients, desperately trying to salvage what was left of his business after the past week's devastation. Claire had timed it perfectly. No tearful goodbyes. No chance for either of them to talk her out of what she knew had to be done. She stood in the kitchen for the last time, memorizing every detail. The coffee machine Graham had taught her to use, the breakfast nook where she'd helped Isla with countless art projects, the window that looked out over the backyard where they'd played countless games of tag and had impromptu picnics on warm afternoons. This had been home. For the first time in her adult life, she'd found a place where she belonged completely, and now she was walking away from it. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Melody in Portland. The job at Roosevelt Elementary is still available if you want it. Fresh start, new city, better benefits. Let me know. Claire stared at the message. Portland. 3,000 miles from Graham and Isla. 3,000 miles from photographers and society reporters and people who thought her love was inappropriate. 3,000 miles from the life she'd never expected to want so desperately. She typed back, "Tell them I'm interested." The front door opened just as she was placing her resignation letter on the kitchen counter. "Claire?" Graham's voice carried through the house, confused. He hadn't expected to find her downstairs so early. Panic shot through her chest. He wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to have to look into his eyes and explain why she was destroying everything they'd built together. "In the kitchen," she called back, her voice steadier than she felt. Graham appeared in the doorway, still wearing the charcoal suit he'd put on for his meeting. His dark hair was disheveled, his tie loosened, and there was something in his expression that made her stomach clench with dread. "You're up early," he said, then noticed the suitcase by the back door. His face went very still. "Claire, how did the meeting go?" she asked, though she could already read the answer in his posture. "Morrison Architecture is officially withdrawing from the Meridian project," Graham said quietly. "Richard made it very clear that as long as I'm involved with you, his company won't be doing business with mine." Claire's heart sank. Another client gone. Another piece of Graham's professional life destroyed because of her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't apologize for other people's narrow-mindedness." Graham's eyes fixed on her suitcase. "What's going on, Claire?" She handed him the resignation letter with hands that trembled despite her efforts to stay calm. Graham took the envelope, but didn't open it. "This isn't the answer." "It's the only answer," Claire said firmly. "Graham, you've lost 3 major clients in a week. Linda's complaint to the architectural board is still pending. How much more damage are you willing to let me cause?" "You're not causing anything." "They are. The result is the same." Claire wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together the pieces of her breaking heart. "Your business is suffering. Your reputation is under attack. Isla's security is at risk. All because you fell in love with the wrong woman. You're not the wrong woman, Graham said fiercely. You're the only woman. For me, for Isla, for this family. What family? The words came out harsher than she intended. We were pretending, Graham. Playing house while the real world waited to tear us apart? Well, it's done waiting. Graham's face went pale. You don't mean that, don't I? Claire forced herself to meet his eyes, even though it felt like looking directly into the sun. I'm a nanny, Graham. I take care of other people's children because I can't afford my own. I live paycheck to paycheck. I drive a 10-year-old Honda, and my idea of fine dining is the chain restaurant with the endless breadsticks. What exactly did we think was going to happen here? I thought we were going to build a life together, Graham said quietly. I thought love was enough. Love isn't enough when it costs you everything. Claire's voice cracked, despite her efforts to stay strong. I can't watch you lose your career because of me. I can't watch Isla suffer because the adults in her life made selfish choices. So your solution is to abandon us? The word hit like a physical blow. I'm not abandoning you. I'm setting you free. From what? From happiness? From the first real joy we've had in this house since Emma died? Claire flinched. From the scandal? From the judgment? From a relationship that's destroying your life? You are my life, Graham said desperately. You and Isla. Everything else is just details. Details that include your daughter's college fund, your employees' livelihoods, and the career you spent 15 years building. Claire picked up her suitcase, though it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I won't be responsible for taking that away from you. Graham moved to block her path to the door. What about Isla? She loves you. You promised her you'd come back. The reminder of her promise to the little girl felt like a knife twisting in her chest. She'll understand when she's older, when she realizes that sometimes adults have to make hard choices to protect the people they love. She'll think you abandoned her, just like... Graham stopped, but Claire heard the words he didn't say, just like her mother had. Not by choice, not intentionally, but death was abandonment to a 7-year-old's heart. And now Claire was choosing to leave, which might hurt even more. Maybe that's better, Claire said, hating herself for the words. Maybe it's better for her to think I'm selfish than to know I left because loving her father was destroying his life. You're destroying our lives by leaving, Graham said, his voice breaking. Don't you understand that? Claire looked at him, this man who had somehow become everything she'd never dared to dream she could have. His dark eyes were bright with unshed tears. His hands clenched at his sides as if he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. I understand that I love you too much to watch you lose everything because of me, she said softly. And I love you too much to let you walk away because other people are too small-minded to see what we have. They stood there in the kitchen where they'd shared so many ordinary moments that had become extraordinary simply because they'd been together. The morning light slanted through the windows, illuminating the space between them, a distance that felt like an ocean despite being only a few feet. The car service is here, Claire said, glancing out the window at the sedan waiting in the driveway. Don't go, Graham whispered. Please, we can figure this out. We can fight this together. We can't fight the entire world, Graham, and we shouldn't have to. Claire reached for the door handle, then stopped. Tell Isla, tell her I love her. Tell her that sometimes butterflies have to migrate, but they never forget the gardens that made them happiest. Claire. She walked out the door before he could finish because staying another second would have broken her resolve entirely. The car door closed behind her with a finality that echoed in her chest, and as the sedan pulled away from the house that had been home, Claire allowed herself one look back. Graham stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the warm light spilling from inside. Even from a distance, she could see the defeat in his posture, the way his shoulders sagged as if the weight of the world had finally become too much to bear. She'd wanted to set him free, but looking at him now, she wondered if she'd only created a different kind of prison. As the car turned the corner and the Sinclair mansion disappeared from view, Claire pressed her face to the window and let herself cry for everything she was leaving behind. For the little girl who would wake up tomorrow and find her gone. For the man who had taught her that love could feel like coming home. For the family they'd almost been. But sometimes loving someone meant walking away, even when it felt like dying. Sometimes the butterfly had to migrate alone, no matter how much it longed to stay in the garden forever. And sometimes the bravest thing you could do was save someone from the storm you'd brought into their life, even if it meant flying directly into your own darkness. 3 hours later, Claire Bennett was on a plane to Portland, carrying nothing but 2 suitcases and a heart that felt too broken to ever heal. But healing, she would learn. sometimes began in the most unexpected ways. 6 months later, Claire was kneeling in the garden behind Roosevelt Elementary School in Portland, helping a group of third graders plant marigolds, when her phone rang with a number she hadn't seen in weeks. "Miss Bennett, look!" 7-year-old Marcus held up a seedling with dirt-covered hands. "Mine's already getting tall." "That's beautiful, Marcus," Claire said softly, her heart clenching at how much his enthusiasm reminded her of another 7-year-old 3,000 miles away. Marigolds are strong flowers. They bloom even when conditions aren't perfect. She'd learned a lot about blooming in difficult conditions over the past 6 months. Portland had been everything her sister promised: a fresh start, a good job, a small apartment with a view of Mount Hood on clear days. She'd thrown herself into teaching, into creating a new life that had nothing to do with architectural firms or society galas or little girls who drew family portraits that included women who didn't know they deserved to be in them. She'd almost convinced herself she was healing. But healing, Claire had discovered, wasn't the same as forgetting. It wasn't the same as not dreaming about dark-haired little girls and the sound of Graham's laugh when Isla told her terrible knock-knock jokes. It wasn't the same as not checking the architectural trade publications online to see if Sinclair and Associates had recovered from the scandal she'd left in her wake. Her phone rang again, insistent. "5 more minutes, everyone," Claire called to her students, then stepped away to answer. "Hello? Claire?" The voice on the other end made her knees nearly buckle. "It's Graham." 6 months of careful emotional reconstruction crumbled in an instant. "Graham, how did you get this number?" "Your sister." His voice was different somehow, stronger, more determined. "We need to talk." "Graham, we agreed." "No, you decided." "There's a difference." She could hear something in the background. Voices, movement, the sound of footsteps on marble floors. "Where are you right now?" "I'm at work." "Graham, you can't just call." "Miss Bennett?" Marcus appeared at her elbow, tugging on her cardigan. "There's a man here looking for you." Claire's heart stopped. "What?" She turned toward the school building and felt the world tilt off its axis. Graham Sinclair was walking across the playground toward her, his long strides eating up the distance between them. He wore dark jeans and a navy sweater instead of his usual suit, his hair slightly mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it. Behind him, trying to keep up with his determined pace, was a small figure with dark hair and familiar braids. "Isla," Claire breathed. "Miss Claire?" Isla broke free from Graham's side and ran across the playground, her backpack bouncing against her small frame. "Miss Claire, you're here. You're really here." Claire dropped to her knees just in time to catch the little girl who launched herself into her arms with the force of 6 months' worth of missing. Isla smelled like strawberry shampoo and childhood and home, and Claire felt tears streaming down her face before she could stop them. "I missed you," Isla whispered against her neck. "I missed you so much it made my chest hurt." "I missed you too, sweetheart," Claire managed, holding Isla so tightly she was afraid she might never let go. "Every single day. Why didn't you come back? You promised you'd come back." The question hit like a physical blow. Claire looked up to find Graham standing a few feet away, his dark eyes intense with emotion she couldn't begin to decipher. "It's complicated, baby," Claire said softly, smoothing Isla's hair. "Adult things are sometimes very complicated. But Daddy fixed it," Isla said matter-of-factly, pulling back to look into Claire's face. "He fixed all the complicated things. Tell her, Daddy." Claire's eyes met Graham's over Isla's head. "What is she talking about? Can we go somewhere private?" Graham asked quietly. "There are things I need to tell you, things that couldn't wait for a phone call." 20 minutes later, they sat in Claire's small apartment living room. Graham on the couch, Isla curled up beside him, and Claire in the chair across from them, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she was too nervous to drink. "Linda's gone," Graham said without preamble. "Fired from the firm, banned from the architectural board for filing false complaints." Claire's cup rattled against the saucer. "What?" "It turns out," Graham continued, his voice carefully controlled, "that Richard Morrison wasn't the only client she approached with concerns about my judgment. She'd been systematically contacting our business partners, spreading rumors, trying to isolate me professionally." "But why would—" "Because she was in love with me," Graham said simply. "Had been for years, apparently. When you and I got together, she decided to eliminate the competition by any means necessary." Claire felt sick. "Graham, I'm so sorry. If you hadn't left, we might never have discovered what she was doing." Graham leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Claire, the Meridian Project? Richard Morrison pulled out because Linda told him I was having an affair with the nanny while Emma was dying. She told the hospital board that you were unstable, that you'd been inappropriate with Isla. She told 3 different reporters that you were blackmailing me for money. The room spun around Claire. None of that is true. I know. Richard knows. Everyone knows now. Graham's voice grew stronger. Richard's back on the Meridian project. The hospital board issued a public apology, and Linda's facing potential legal charges for defamation. Miss Claire, Isla piped up, Daddy says Linda was like the mean witch in the fairy tales. She tried to break up our family because she was jealous. Claire looked at this little girl she'd loved like her own daughter, then at the man who had somehow traveled 3,000 miles to find her. But the scandal, Claire said weakly, the newspapers, the judgment, disappeared the moment the truth came out. Graham interrupted. Turns out people are much more interested in stories about vindictive business partners than they are about successful architects finding love. I don't understand. Why didn't you call sooner? Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to have everything fixed first, Graham said softly. I wanted to come to you with proof that our love wasn't a liability, that choosing us wouldn't cost anyone anything, except the people who tried to tear us apart. Claire's hands shook as she set down her teacup. But I left. I abandoned you both. You sacrificed yourself to protect us. Graham corrected. There's a difference. I broke my promise to Isla. No, you didn't. Isla climbed off the couch and went to Claire's chair, crawling into her lap with the unconscious confidence of a child returning to safety. You said butterflies migrate, but they come back to the gardens that made them happiest. Well, we came to you. Claire looked down at Isla, then up at Graham, who was watching them both with an expression of such love and longing that it took her breath away. We flew 3,000 miles to find you, Graham said quietly. Because you are our garden, Claire. You're where we're happiest. You're where we belong. But Portland, my job, my life here, can wait a few days while we talk, Graham interrupted. I'm not asking you to pack up and leave immediately. I'm asking you to listen, to consider the possibility that sometimes the butterfly doesn't have to migrate alone. Claire held Isla closer, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. What exactly are you asking me? Graham slid off the couch and knelt beside Claire's chair, taking her free hand in both of his. I'm asking you to come home, he said simply. I'm asking you to marry me. I'm asking you to let us be the family we were always meant to be. Daddy has a ring, Isla announced helpfully. It's really pretty. He showed me on the airplane. Graham reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple, elegant solitaire that caught the afternoon light streaming through Claire's apartment window. I know this is crazy, Graham said, his voice rough with emotion. I know showing up here unannounced and proposing in your living room isn't romantic. But Claire, I've spent 6 months missing you. 6 months realizing that every single day without you is a day wasted. 6 months watching Isla draw pictures of butterflies and ask when you're coming home. You really want me to come home? Claire whispered. We need you to come home, Graham corrected. The house is too quiet without your laugh. Isla's bedtime stories don't have enough voices. My coffee tastes wrong when you're not there to fix it. And what about everyone else? Your clients, your colleagues, the people who think, let them think whatever they want, Graham said firmly. I've learned that the only opinions that matter are the ones from people who love us. And the people who love us want us to be happy. Claire looked down at Isla, who was watching the exchange with bright, hopeful eyes. What do you think, sweetheart? Claire asked softly. Should I come home? Yes, Isla said immediately. We need you. Daddy burns the pancakes and he can't do French braids and he gets sad when he thinks I'm not looking. Claire's eyes filled with tears. And what about you? Are you okay with Daddy and me getting married? I've been okay with it since the night you read me the princess story, Isla said matter-of-factly. I just didn't know if grown-ups were smart enough to figure it out. Claire laughed through her tears looking at Graham, who was still kneeling beside her chair with the ring box in his hands and love written across every line of his face. Claire Bennett, he said softly, will you marry me? Will you come home and let us love you the way you deserve to be loved? Will you let us prove that sometimes love is exactly enough? Claire thought about the past 6 months in Portland, the quiet apartment, the new job, the carefully constructed life that had never quite felt like home. Then she thought about Sunday morning pancakes and bedtime stories with different voices and a little girl who drew family portraits that included women who deserved to be in them. Yes, she whispered. Yes? Graham's face lit up with a smile that could have powered the entire city. Yes, Claire said stronger. Yes to coming home. Yes to marrying you. Yes to being the family we were always meant to be. Graham slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, then leaned up to kiss her while Isla cheered and clapped her hands. And in that moment, sitting in her small Portland apartment with the two people who had somehow become her entire world, Claire finally understood what the fairy tales had been trying to tell her all along. Sometimes love does conquer all. Sometimes the butterfly finds its way back to the garden. And sometimes, if you're very brave and very lucky, you get to keep the family you choose and the love you fight for, and the happy ending you never dared to believe you deserved. 2 years later, Claire Sinclair stood in the kitchen of their newly renovated home, watching through the window as her husband pushed their 9-year-old daughter on the swing he'd rebuilt to be taller, stronger, more suited to a girl who was growing too fast for fairy tale pajamas, but still young enough to believe in happy endings. The morning light caught the gold of her wedding ring as she poured coffee into 2 mugs, one for herself, one for Graham, both exactly the way they liked them. Some habits, the good ones, never changed. "Mama Claire, where did you put my science poster?" The voice belonged to Isla, who had started calling her Mama Claire 6 months after the wedding, when the adoption papers were finalized, and Claire officially became not just Graham's wife, but Isla's mother in every way that mattered. "Check the dining room table, sweetheart," Claire called back, smiling at how naturally the title had come to feel. "And don't forget your lunch." At 11 years old, Isla had grown into a confident, curious girl with her father's determination and her mother's, both mothers', capacity for love. She talked about Emma without sadness now, as someone who had loved her first and would have loved Claire too. The framed photo on the mantel showed all 4 of them now, Emma holding baby Isla, and beside it, a picture from Claire and Graham's wedding day with Isla between them, holding both their hands. "Found it!" Isla appeared in the kitchen with her poster about renewable energy, her dark hair pulled back in the French braid Claire had finally perfected. "Did you know that some butterflies can migrate over 2,000 miles? The teacher said monarchs have a magnetic compass in their brains." "Is that so?" Claire handed Isla her lunch bag, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead. "What else did you learn?" "That they always know how to find their way home," Isla said matter-of-factly, "even if it takes generations." Through the window, Claire watched Graham check his watch and wave toward the house. Time for the school run, then his day at the office where Sinclair and Associates had grown into one of the most respected firms in the city. The Meridian project had been just the beginning. After Linda's deception came to light, business had flourished as clients appreciated Graham's integrity and vision. "Ready for school, Butterfly?" Graham asked as he came through the back door using the nickname that had stuck after Isla's migration project the previous year. "Ready." Isla grabbed her backpack and headed for the door, then stopped. "Oh, I almost forgot. Mrs. Patterson wants to know if you and Mama Claire can help with the spring carnival next month." Claire and Graham exchanged glances. The spring carnival, the same event where a photographer had captured their happiness 2 years ago and changed everything. "We'd love to," Claire said. "Perfect. I told her you would. You're the best helpers because you actually like spending time together." Isla rolled her eyes with preteen exasperation. Some parents just pretend. After they'd dropped Isla at school, Graham pulled into the parking lot of the small cafe where they'd had their first real date. It had become a tradition. Coffee together on Friday mornings when both their schedules allowed, a small ritual that kept them connected in the midst of busy lives. "So," Graham said, settling into their usual booth with his coffee, "I have news." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Good news or life-changing news?" "Both, hopefully." Graham's eyes sparkled with the excitement she'd learned meant he was about to share something wonderful. "You know the children's wing project at the hospital? The one you've been designing for 6 months?" Claire nodded. "What about it?" "The board approved it. Full funding. Construction starts this summer." Graham reached across the table to take her hand. "And they want to name it the Claire Sinclair Children's Learning Center." Claire's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. "What?" "They said your work with the literacy program, your dedication to children's emotional well-being, your advocacy for trauma-informed care, it all made you the perfect person to honor." Graham's thumb stroked across her knuckles. "You've touched more lives than you know, Claire. Not just mine and Isla's." Tears pricked at Claire's eyes. 2 years ago, she'd been a nanny afraid she wasn't qualified to love a child who wasn't biologically hers. Now her name would be on a building dedicated to helping children heal and learn and grow. "There's more," Graham continued, his voice growing softer. "I was hoping we could make an announcement at the groundbreaking ceremony." "What kind of announcement?" Graham's free hand moved to rest on the small swell of Claire's belly that was just beginning to show beneath her loose sweater. The kind that involves tiny socks and midnight feedings and Isla becoming a big sister. Claire's breath caught. They'd been trying for a baby for 8 months, hoping to give Isla the sibling she'd been requesting since the wedding. The positive pregnancy test had appeared just a week ago, early enough that they'd decided to wait a few more weeks before sharing the news. You want to tell everyone at the same time? I want to celebrate all of it, Graham said, his eyes bright with love and anticipation. The building that will help hundreds of children, the woman whose name will be on it, and the new life we're creating together. Claire pressed her hand over his, over the place where their second child was growing. Isla's going to be over the moon. She's going to be an incredible big sister. Just like you're an incredible father. Just like you're an incredible mother, Graham countered, leaning across the table to kiss her softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city wake up around them. 2 years ago, Claire had sat in this same cafe terrified that loving Graham would destroy his life. Now she understood that love didn't destroy. It built, it healed, it created space for more joy than she'd ever thought possible. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? Claire asked quietly. If Linda had succeeded? If I'd stayed in Portland? Graham considered this seriously. Sometimes. But then I remember what Isla said about butterflies. Which part? That they always know how to find their way home, even if it takes generations. Graham's eyes met hers across the table. We found our way home, Claire. To each other. To the family we were meant to be. Nothing Linda did. Nothing the world threw at us could change that. Claire smiled, thinking about the little girl who would come home from school today bubbling with excitement about science projects and playground adventures. About the husband who still brought her coffee exactly the way she liked it every morning. About the baby growing inside her who would be born into a family that had fought for the right to exist and won. You know what I think? Claire said, standing up and reaching for Graham's hand. What's that? I think some gardens are worth migrating thousands of miles to find. She pulled him to his feet, smiling at the way his eyes crinkled when he was truly happy. And once you find them, you never have to leave again? Never? Never, Claire confirmed, going up on her toes to kiss him properly. Because home isn't a place, Graham. It's the people who choose to love you every single day. That afternoon, when they picked Isla up from school, she climbed into the back seat chattering about her science presentation and her friend Madison's upcoming birthday party, and whether they could stop for ice cream on the way home. Oh, she said suddenly. I forgot to tell you. Madison's mom asked if you guys are really happy, or if you just pretend for pictures like some parents do. What did you tell her? Graham asked, catching Claire's eyes in the rearview mirror. I told her you're disgustingly happy, Isla said matter-of-factly. Like sometimes I catch you making hard eyes at each other when you think I'm not looking. It's kind of gross, but also kind of nice. Claire burst out laughing. Hard eyes? You know what I mean. Like how princes look at princesses in the movies when they realize they're going to live happily ever after. And is that what we're doing? Claire asked. Living happily ever after? Isla was quiet for a moment, considering this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. I think, she said finally, that we're living happily ever right now. And right now is the only ever that really matters. From the driver's seat, Graham reached over to squeeze Claire's hand. In the back seat, their daughter hummed a song she'd learned in music class. And in her heart, Claire felt the quiet certainty that came from being exactly where she belonged. Some stories, she thought, were worth all the chapters it took to get to the ending, even when the ending was really just the beginning of something even more beautiful. What have you learned about love from Claire and Graham's story? Sometimes the most beautiful endings are the ones where love doesn't just survive, it thrives, grows, and creates space for even more happiness than we thought possible. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments about what this story meant to you. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.